Utah, about 7,000 feet elevation. Talking about Daf Yomi, I spent about 2 years in Daf Yomi class. That's a page of Gemara every day, page of Talmud. And I remember tractates such as Gittin and Eruvin were just these dense, minute, endless passages of Jewish law. And like, how could people spend 3 years of their lives studying kosher chickens? Like, where is the, like, how do you get excited about that? I'm unable to study things that I can't get excited about. I just don't have the discipline. If I can't find excitement and inspiration, I'm out of there. So, Mark, you've spent years studying the Talmud. And, some of it's fascinating, even for a layman, but those, minute sections of Jewish law, the endless things like Eruvin and Gittin, how on earth do you find inspiration to, keep slogging through it?
It's a great question, Luke. And there's a great, beautiful saying that appears in many traditions, but it's particularly true in Judaism, which is God is in the details. And the Talmud is filled with details. The Talmud's, about, a series of great general principles, but then all of the argument is about the 5% of details, because it's in the details that it happens. The details are about distinctions. It's about understanding the particularity of this moment. What's really true? What's this really about? What's the real spiritual presence? What's the ethical moment? And no moment's like any other moment. And so the first issue in Talmud study is an enormous attention to the individual situation, an enormous attention to detail, a refusal to kind of get lost in generalization, and a willingness to enter into the unique depth of every particular law, of every particular situation, and how every law interfaces with every situation. And that's actually the ground of Jewish ethics. It's paradoxically, Talmudic study is both an intellectual study, but it's also a spiritual practice to root a person in the basic orientations of Jewish ethics. And the basic orientation of Jewish ethics is a refusal to accept easy truths, a willingness to challenge everything, every detail, every situation. No, it's not true that this is like that other situation. It's not true that this is what always happens. Let's look and gather the facts about what's happening right here. Let's look at it deeply. Let's not overlay it with generalities. Let's find God in the infinity of the particular detail. Once you begin to understand that that's the spiritual practice of Talmud study, and that by studying Talmud, you're actually orienting yourself to a particular way of being an ethical person in the world, so then it's not about, is this a fascinating detail or not? It's about the willingness to almost meditatively pay attention to the detail, to arouse your curiosity about the details. One of the things that you said the other day is people can't be bothered with the details, right? People are they've got these general things. We talked about it before. Oh, that must be a sex scandal with a spiritual leader. Oh, we know what those are about. Well, no, actually, let's look carefully. What actually is going on here? Maybe it's something entirely different that's happening. But because people are so lazy, there's a kind of profound laziness. And people actually are willing not to call, not to check, not to investigate. But actually the basic position of Jewish law is check carefully. Look carefully, says the Talmud, at both sides, always. Gather all the information carefully. And honor everyone. Don't attack anyone. Don't demonize any side. Look, by gathering all the information, how to include everyone. How to affirm everyone's perspective. How to hear the truth in what everyone's saying, and through that come to a healing. The Talmud's very, very profound about holding all positions. We call that in Talmudic study, Shiv'im Panim LeTorah. There are 70 faces to Torah. That is the ability to take all the positions, to hold all the perspectives, and from that place, get to a place of evolution and healing. So once I look at Talmudic study that way, as a spiritual practice, then it shifts at its core. So I hope that addresses a little bit what you asked, Luke.
What percentage of the time that you're studying Talmud do you enjoy what you're doing?
great question. I actually loved the Talmudic study, very much. So I most of the time actually enjoyed it. And, clearly, like in any discipline, there's times when you just have to slog through. You're training for a marathon, right? Not every moment is, Rocky Balboa, running up the steps there in Philadelphia, at Liberty Hall. There's a lot of training, there's a lot of slogging, and we require discipline in life. Eros doesn't mean, breaking the ball boundaries. Eros means, the gorgeous beauty of the moment, the way Plato understood it, but I get to that only through deep and profound discipline.
So what role does Talmud study play in your life today?
It's a great question. I study Talmud less today than I used to. The last 2 years, Talmud study hasn't been an integral part of my life, although it has been. Part of the reason is I actually didn't have Talmuds here, and I don't like studying online, so I kind of turned to other books. And as I've gotten older, I've become more interested in parts of the Talmud I used to skip. What I did do over the last year, although I didn't study Talmud in its classical way, page by page, as you were describing, but I actually studied with 2 or 3 people, very, very beautiful people. I studied what are called the Agadic passages of the Talmud, which are the, I call them Talmudic textual koans. Little short stories, kind of like Buddhist koans, which are subversive Talmudic passages, which kind of undermine the classical truths and seek to point us to a deeper understanding, to a deeper truth. So that's really where I've gone in Talmudic study. I'm actually completely fascinated and intoxicated and in love with the study of the Agadah, the Talmudic textual koan. And in terms of the halachic parts of the Talmud, I'm reading now, other halachic texts, less Talmud the last 2 years, although I miss it greatly and hope to return to it, as life kind of moves into its flow.
I remember when you spoke at UCLA, I think Passover week of 2002, I believe, and you talked about that when you're alone in a hotel room at 2 a.m., what you're doing is studying Talmud.
Right, that's correct. What I said was actually, I remember that particular story, is that I would always take with me, many texts, both Talmudic texts, Hasidic texts, and when I would kind of come to a place, like kind of that late night hotel room where you got to kind of move through the emptiness, one of the ways I would kind of find myself, locate myself, in terms of kind of being in the presence of the divine was to study kind of the sacred texts. Whether that meant a Talmudic text or whether it meant a Hasidic text. It was actually more often that I would study a Hasidic text than a Talmudic text because it's easier to enter kind of late at night. Texts like Kiddushat HaLevi, Lev Isaac of Berdichev, or the Bnei Yissaschar, right, or the Ishbitzer, right, Mordechai Leiner of Izbaka. Those are the kind of texts that I would, more often than not take with me.
I think you're lecturing about that what defines you is how you feel your emptiness. I think that was one of your points.
I think you have a good memory, right? That's what I think I said in that lecture. It's a very good memory, Luke. Is that a person is very much what they do with their emptiness, right? Life is what you do with your emptiness. We all feel empty moments. We all experience the void. And the question is, do we void dance? Do we void dance? Do we do all sorts of things to dance around the void? Or are we able to kind of feel the emptiness, sink into it, walk through it? And only when I walk through that emptiness do I actually get to, right? Do I get to a fullness? Do I get to a kind of, deep, rich, textured, beautiful sense of self and of divinity? But when I'm trying to avoid my emptiness, and I can avoid it with religious practice, I can avoid it by taking up a cause and attacking people, I can avoid it by eating too much food, I can avoid it by too much sex or sex that's inappropriate, right? There's a lot of ways for avoid dance. And avoid dance is what I call pseudo-eros, as opposed to real eros. So life is what you do with your emptiness. What do I do with my emptiness? How do I walk through it? And like myself, like you, like all of us, I'm a work in progress. We're all works in progress. We're all evolving. And the way we evolve is very much measured by how we walk through our emptiness.
And I feel empty. I go online and I slam someone, and then I wait for the reaction.
That is exactly
then I don't feel empty
the problem.
anymore. I feel like right at the center of what's going on.
Luke, now we've come to the core of the problem. We've now identified the problem. When Luke gets angry, he blogs.
Just when I feel empty.
When you feel, I understand. That is, you know, that is precisely what we don't want to do.
Now, who was the founder of the Musa movement? The 19th century Muslim movement.
The founder of the Muslim movement, who would, of course, take great exception to lashing out at someone when we feel empty. Right? When I feel empty, I want to reach out and actually find someone and embrace them. But the founder was Israel Salanter.
Okay, did he teach, or was it one of his successors who taught that while most people put on a public front of piety and sin privately, he encouraged his students to go out and sin publicly? Not gross sins, but like playing cards, and be righteous privately. Was that Israel Salanter, or was that one of his successors?
There is those kind of sayings do appear. There's a book by what's his name, Katz, 5 volumes, called The Muslim Movement, and there he cites that story. I believe, I have to check, he cites it in Israel Salanter's name, but it's always hard to know whether it was him or one of his first generation students. But you're correct in saying that story is a Muslim movement story.
It's kind of an intriguing little story.
But please, let's not distort it into a terrible, distorted version of self-justification, of attacking people inaccurately on blogs. I'm sure you intend nothing as absurd as that.
I think that's what Israel Salanter had in mind when he encouraged his students. He said, sin vigorously, quoting Martin Luther, but even more believe in the forgiving power of Jesus Christ. Even if you commit fornication or even murder, know that you can be forgiven. So go out and blog vigorously, blog publicly.
I would say the chances, Luke, of that being true are the chances of Chris Rock being white.